Chapter 9 The Underdogs. By the end of the first week of school, Will had only found 10 guys his age who wanted to play football in Forbes this season. On a scale of 10, he felt like a zero, felt almost as bad as he did when he thought there was going to be no season. The worst part? The team had no coach. Mr. Carrington, who worked at the bank of Forbes, had coached the 12-year-old team in town for as long as Will could remember. And Mr. Carrington had agreed to do it again this season, at least before the town councils had spread the news about not having enough money. But when Will and Tim stopped by the bank on Monday to tell him about New Balance, tell him they were going to have a season after all, he heard a different kind of bad news. Mr. Carrington had gotten a job at a bank called Fifth Third in Toledo, Ohio. It had all happened so quickly, but it was too good of an opportunity to pass up. He said that his wife and kids had already moved so that they could start school on time. Mr. Carrington said he felt terrible telling them like this, that he hadn't bothered to tell the kids on the team or even the town council because he didn't think there was going to be a team. He said he'd always been away for most of the last couple weeks looking for a house to buy in Toledo. As great an opportunity as this is, I honestly feel terrible about leaving you guys, Mr. Carrington said. And once Bobby hears the news, he's going to feel worse than I do. This has been hard enough on him already. So that's why none of the guys had seen Bobby lately. Their quarterback had moved to Toledo. No coach, no quarterback, just like that. Not even Troy Palomo could stack that many people with one hit. Now that week had come to an end, amazingly, at least to Will's way of thinking, with them being one player short of being able to call themselves a real team. Will had thrown up his prayer and New Balance had answered it. Except it turned out they only had 10 live bodies in a sport where you needed 11. So now and Tim and Chris and Jeremiah were sitting on the floor of Will's bedroom, an emergency summit of the core players on the team. They had all chipped in to order pizza. It's a good thing we have food, Tim said. I don't think nearly as well when I'm hungry. Then how do we explain the way you think the rest of the time? Will asked. Tim nearly folded the slice of pepperoni in his hand. Tim neatly folded the slice of pepperoni in his hand and said, why do you have to be such a hater? There hadn't been much talking while they waited for pizza to be delivered. Their initial enthusiasm over the letter, the excitement of spreading the news that Mr. DeMartini and New Balance were willing to finance their team and their season had been replaced now by the very bad vibe they all had now because of the lack of enthusiasm shown by the rest of the seventh grade when it came to football. Before the letter came, Will had thought the only number he had to worry about was $10,000, not 10 players. They had all taken up the team to their classmates, or they had all talked up the team to their classmates. They had posted a sign up sheet and had everyone on the team add their name to get the ball rolling. 10 names on Tuesday. By Friday, the same 10 names. One kid from last year's team, Carlos Estrada, had decided he wanted to play soccer this year, not football. Where? Will had asked him. On what team? Castle Rock. Dude, you're killing me, he said. But there was no talking him out of it. Carlos had been a soccer player growing up in the Dominican Republic, and he was happy to be playing again. He was gone, and Bobby Carrington was gone, and 13 had become 11. Brendan Donaldson, their center from last season, was to the next to go. He had broken his arm at the skateboard park over in Castle Rock at the beginning of August and was still in a cast. He was just hoping he'd be ready for basketball season. 10 guys. Nobody knew wanted to play. It was beyond amazing to Will. You sure you talked to everybody? Chris Aleo said. I talked to every jock in the middle school, Will said. I talked to baseball players, basketball players. I even tried to hijack some of Carlos's new friends on the soccer team. Nothing. We just have to find one more guy, Tim said. How hard can that be? Will said, How hard can that be? Let me ask you something. How we looking so far, big boy? There was another long silence while they ate. Every so often you would hear the sound of Tim's cell phone buzzing. He was the only one of them who had one. Will wondered who could be calling him when his best buds were right here in this room. And to think of it, Will said, say we do find another guy. We're going to try to play the whole season with 11? Really? What if somebody gets hurt? We're right back to where we are right now. I can see it now. Mr. DeMartini shows up to see us play, only we don't have that day. Only we don't that day because it turns out to be a stinking forfeit. They wouldn't have this problem in Castle Rock, Tim said. They have to cut kids over there. Not just football country over there, Will said. A whole different football planet. He could hear Ben Clark's voice inside his head, clear as a bell. Right after Will told him that they had money for the team and Ben had said, in Forbes, he started to take a bite of pizza, then tossed his slice into the box, no longer hungry. The week he'd just had felt like a whole game of hard hits, and he still couldn't believe they were in this kind of fix. It had been a perfect plan. As Tim loved to say, Will felt as if he'd absolutely crushed the whole idea of getting their team back together. Now this. We gotta figure something out, he said. You know what all this you know what this all means. That we drove the ball down the field and couldn't push it across. Will turned and glared at him, but Tim gave him a wave off, standing up now, not just addressing Will, addressing the whole group. Let me finish, he said. And by the way, that glare of death from you doesn't scare me nearly as much as it used to. He took a deep breath. Okay, we've been all over the place tonight. I think what we need to do right now is prioritize. Will couldn't help it. As frustrated and angry as he was feeling, he barked out a laugh. You don't even know what that means, he said. Do too, Tim said. I made my mother use it in a sentence at breakfast. He said to Will, do I have your permission to continue? Will nodded. This is my only opinion. But before we think about finding another player, I think we have to make sure we've got somebody to coach us. Because they won't just let us play in the league without a coach, even if we get 11. He sat back down then, picked up the slice that Will had just dropped into the box and said, You gonna finish this? Okay, so let's talk about coaches, Will said. They sat there and began to go through the list of possibilities. What about Mr. York? Chris said. Mr. York had coached them last year. Maybe they could talk to him into moving up and coaching them if somebody else could coach the 11s. Will said, you didn't hear? He moved to Castle Rock and took a job in the bottle factory, some kind of night manager. Never mind, Chris said. Jeremiah said, what about Mr. Peggs? He played in college, right? Mr. Pagliaro was their Phi Ed teacher at Forbes Middle, but he was also their math teacher, and everyone knew his idea of teaching Phi Ed was handing his kids a few basket or soccer balls, taking his whistle, and sitting on the bleachers grading homework. Then they talked about their dads. Will said he couldn't do it. No way. Not holding down his post office job and going to night school. Will had always thought his dad would make a great coach, but knew he wouldn't want to do it. Would rather do just about anything than get back on a football field. That's why Will wasn't even going to ask, knowing how bad his dad would feel when he said no. Tim's dad was also ruled out instantly. The guys knew he was constantly traveling back and forth between Forbes and Pittsburgh, where he'd landed temp work as a computer technician, hoping it would eventually lead to a full-time job. Will didn't even want to think about what would happen if Mr. LeBlanc got his wish and had to move. Chris's dad was an interstate truck driver and was usually gone for half the week, sometimes more. Jeremiah's parents had divorced after the sneaker factory closed, and his dad had left town not long after that, taking an assembly line job in Detroit for one of their car companies. Maybe if some of the dads took turns coaching, Chris said. In that moment, Will felt like he was a D lineman with a big hand up, swatting a pass out of the air. We're desperate, he said to Chris, but not that desperate. At least not yet. Coaching by committee, it would feel like they were babysitting us. Why don't you coach? Tim said to Will. Seriously, dude, you know more about football than any 5 kids I know, or any of us know, and more than most adults. This isn't a book, Will said, wishing it were. Thinking about the happy endings you get in the sports books he loved, sitting there in his bedroom and thinking about the happy endings he thought he had, or at least at the beginning of one, when he'd opened Mr. DeMartini's letter, they heard the front door close, Will's dad giving them a shout out from the bottom of the stairs. Then Will could hear the slow walk up the stairs, as he had heard so many times before, almost being able to time when his dad would finally get to the top. Joe Taylor poked his head in, saw the scatter of pizza boxes and empty Gatorade bottles. I assume, he said, surveying the mess with one raised eyebrow, that you gentlemen are going to clean up when you're done. On it, Mr. T, Tim said. I actually meant the other guys, Timmy. Tragically, I gave up on your cleaning abilities long ago. Tim put his head down, trying to look sad. The family of haters, he said. Will's dad said, any progress? He knew what the summit was about, knew the spot they were all in. Will had given his dad the play-by-play all week long. Nope, Will said. Not unless you count knocking off 2 large pies, still not coming up with one more player or coach. You'll think of something, you always do, Joe Taylor said. Will said, you sound like him, nodding to Tim. Joe Taylor grinned and said, watch your mouth. Paused and said, seriously? Look on the bright side. You wouldn't even be here tonight if you hadn't come up with the brilliant idea of sending the letter to the sneaker guy. I know, Dad. Believe me, I know. But I wasn't sure that when guys found out that not only were we going to have a team, that we had a sponsor, a proud sponsor, Tim added. Like New Balance, guys would be willing to run through a wall to play with us. His dad said, you've never had to run through walls because you always found a way to make a hole for yourself, even when the blocking broke down. Or found a hole. So find one now. His dad made it sound so easy. Will wished the guys helped him clean up, then they left too. It was still way earlier than when Will went to bed, especially on a weekend night. But sometimes thinking this hard on anything, thinking this hard and wanting something this badly, exhausted him in a way that sports never did. He washed up, got ready for bed, shut off the lights, found the pirate station on his small radio, knowing they were getting ready to play the Padres in San Diego. Will liked baseball well enough, but he loved games from the West Coast in the night. So now that was his background music, the voice of the Pirates announcers, the sounds of the game coming into his bedroom from all the way across the country. But he was still thinking football thoughts, back of his head on the pillow, fingers laced behind it, staring at the ceiling, waiting for another brilliant idea, trying to find his hole.